In this video, I'm going to be talking about variables. So, what is a variable? Well, a variable in coding is just something that stores information. So, for example, let's write down Jitty as a variable. And the information we want to store in Jitty is, let's say, the number 15. Alright, so we're storing Jitty as the integer 15. So what we can actually do is make another variable, add. And we can add Jitty and another number, 2, right? And in the previous video, I talked about printing. So we can actually print or show the output of add, the variable add, onto the terminal. So if Jitty is equal to 15, and we were to have 15 here plus 2, we would have 15 plus 2, which is 17. So let's say that add is equal to 17. And we need to double check this by just simply printing it. Let's run the program. And we get the number 17. So how do you initialize a variable? How do you just make a variable? Just write down any word and set an equal. There are some rules to the naming. Oftentimes there might be some very miscellaneous rules sometimes, but usually you're going to get some error if the variable just isn't right. For example, one of these rules is if the variable starts with the integer. You cannot start your variable name with an integer. It doesn't work. You get an error. Invalid imaginary literal. And the reason why it says imaginary literal is because J is how you write down the imaginary number in coding. If you put a 1 next to it. That was actually just a coincidence because I wrote down Jitty. Let's write down number. All right, but put down 2 here, then it's going to give me the error. Invalid decimal literal. Right. This simply just doesn't make any sense. You cannot start the variable name with a letter. Another thing you can't start with is some special symbol, like a quotation mark. Right. A quotation mark symbolizes a string, but you can't, store a variable as a string. You can't do this. This makes no sense. All right. You can make it so that you have a string that is a variable, like this, but you can't store the name of a variable as a string. So the variable just has to be a word or a combination of letters. You can just spam anything, right? Oh, there also can't be spaces. That's a good one. There actually can't be spaces inside of your variable name. Like this. It makes no sense. Okay, you're gonna get this underline. A lot of IDEs, they're going to show you what's the problem with this, right? They're gonna give you some underline. Usually that signifies some error. So, and yeah, this is underlined too, so that signifies some error before you even run it. Let's talk about a couple other features inside of for variables. So if you wanted to, let's say, you wanted to know the data type of your variable, you can write down type. This is called a built-in function, by the way. I'll cover more on that in other videos or later videos. It's just going to be called built-in functions in Python, but it's called a built-in function. And it's type. You write down type with parentheses. All right. If you write down this name of your variable inside of type, and you print out the variable, let's write down. Let's say this as data to make this less confusing. But if you set the type of your string as a variable called data, then it tells you the data type of your variable. So in this case, type tells you that string is a string. Not because of the name, but because you're storing a string inside of this variable. All right. So how about if you had a number, like 23, right? Now, string is no longer equal to a string. It's just the variable name. The variable name tells us nothing about the data type. Let's actually change this to number. And let's print out the data type now. It's going to tell us integer because this is an integer. We can also write down 20.4. Right? If we change this to 20.4, it's going to give us a float. A float is just, if you don't know, any decimal number. And there's another data type, true. All right, true or false, those are Boolean values. And it's a Boolean. So this type thing could be useful if you're confused on what a data type is. You have a large-scale program, you have no idea where that variable is for some apparent reason. There's just a lot of switching between values, and you're confused on what data type the variable is now. You can write down type. It helps you determine that. You can also use type in some with some other features, like with if statements or other things like that. Conditionals. Of course, this video is just to tell you what the features are for variables. Of course, I can't cover everything exactly, but hopefully by the end of this video, I'll be able to give you some general understanding of how to use variables. Now you can apply them. So my goal for this is just to show a bunch of features of this, and let's go on to the next feature that I'm going to show you. You can do string concatenation. So let's write down string 1. So if you don't know what string concatenation is just when you combine two strings together. So let's say this equals hello, and this is world. All right. We can print these two strings by adding them together and then printing them. And we actually combine them together. Also, if you want to, you can save this in another string called total string, where you add both of these together. You add both string 1 and string 2 together, and it's saved as total string. And if you print this out, you can get the same thing, hello world. So you can use string concatenation with variables. And as I showed you, you can also do math with them. Maybe you don't know this, but you can do math with two variables as well, and then store them in another variable called total. So right here, we have the variable 3 stored in num1, and sorry, not the variable 3, the number 3 stored in num1, and the number 2 stored in num2. So all we're doing here is adding 3, which is equal to num1, and adding 2, which is equal to num2. And this stores in a new variable called total, which we can print out, and we get the value 5 for. Now, another thing about coding is that people love shortcuts in computer science, and here is a shortcut. Let's say we have a number. Right? Number is equal to 2. And we can print out this number by just writing down print and writing down num, the variable name. Well, if we print this out, we get the number 2, right? Because num is equal to 2. Now, how about we add values onto num? So instead of adding a value onto num and setting it equal to a new variable, we can just write down plus equals 1. Right? So these two formulas are equivalent. These two are equivalent. What this does is the same as what this bottom line does. So what is actually happening on top? What's actually happening at the bottom? Of course, I'm showing you some math features right now. We are taking the number 2, which is equal to num, and we replace it with 2, right? With variables, you're essentially just replacing something. If we have a 2 here, we add 1 onto the previous value of num. So we have 2 plus 1 now, and 2 plus 1 is equal to 3. And we're reassigning the value of number, or reassigning the variable num to 3. So what these two are doing are the same. All right. All we're doing is reassigning values. So if we were to print out the new value of num, in this case, where we add 1 onto num, we get 3, right? The first print is 2. This is the first value of num. And then now that we readjust the value of num, we get 3. And let's go ahead and comment this out and then look at this, right? This simply is plus equals 1. Simply the same thing. It does the same thing. There's also some other things you can do. You can divide num by 2. Let's say num is a larger number. Let's say number is 6. All right. And if you divide, this is a divide shortcut. Divide by 2, what do you get? You get 3. Now automatically when you divide, it turns the number into a float. That's why it's 3.0 here. But you can do something called typecasting to just set it to an integer, right? So this is what typecasting does. It can turn your floats into integers. All right. I'll have another full video on that covers it a little more in depth, but you don't need to know that for now. Also other things, there's other shortcuts, right? There's a minus shortcut, there was a plus shortcut, divide shortcut, now there's a minus shortcut. What are you going to expect? Right, you have 6 minus 2, which is equal to 4. You can also multiply. So you can there's a multiply shortcut using the asterisk, and you get 12, right? 6 times 2 is 12. So there's a bunch of other shortcuts with this, but essentially what you're doing here is the same as what you're doing here. Different people prefer different things. But keep in mind the order, okay, I didn't turn this off. The order in which you affect the variable's value matters, all right? Notice how num is equal to 6 here. And then when you print num, it prints out 6 at first. Let's actually reassign this. This is just adding 1 onto the previous value of num. So I'm printing 7. So what we're actually doing is, here's the thing about code. I don't know why it keeps doing that. Here's the thing about code. I guess it follows a order. The values of your variables follow an order. So keep in mind, if you have the value of num up here, it's not going to be the same as the value of num down here after you adjust the value. Now, if you don't do anything to adjust the value, of course, the value is just going to stay the same. All right. But if you do something to adjust the value, you can no longer use this previous value. You can no longer use it. All right. If you want to use 6 again, you're going to have to subtract again to go back down to 6. You can't just pull out num again. Now, if you worried about changing the value of some variable, you can simply just assign a new variable, right? New num, right? So that you don't affect the value of num. You don't reassign any new value to num, the num variable. You just create a new variable. It's gonna be different. If we print out num again, print out num. I keep typing in the wrong thing. We print out num again, then you get the same thing, right? You get 6 down here. So if you're worried about changing some variable value, of course, you can just make another variable. Let's talk about another thing about string concatenation. Of course, you can't add a string in integer. Let's say there's a num is equal to 1. Let's say the string is equal to hello. All right. So if we try to print out by string concatenating these two, it's not going to work. All right. So you have string plus num. Why is this not going to work? Because you cannot concatenate an integer and a string together. This is an integer and this is a string. If you want to concatenate these together, if you really want to write down 1, then you have to use typecasting to turn your integer into a string so you can add these two together. Okay. Why is this not working? Okay, that's just a silly mistake. I accidentally changed the name. There you go. Okay. So the reason why that wasn't working is because the names of stir were the same thing. So the variable name here was the same as the variable name here. So I guess it's thinking that I'm trying to call the variable here rather than the function. But right here, let's change the name to string. So now we're typecasting, which means that we're turning this number 1 into a string so that we can add them together now. So you can add 2 strings together, and what we did was just add hello and the number 1. Get this. Another thing that you can do rather than typecasting is writing down a comma. So keep in mind, you can't add them together, but you can write a comma, and this comma automatically puts a space between them. So what this kind of does is just turn num into a string, and then since num is now a string, you can add them together, and it automatically just puts a space between. So a comma can work if you don't care to typecast, or if you want to add an integer and a string together and you want to do it just quickly, you can just write down a simple comma. Last feature that I want you guys to know is that you can do something called multiple assignment. So you can, another shortcut, right? You can write down 3 variables with commas in the same line and assign them different numbers. Let's use different numbers. Yeah, number 6, 7. 6, 7. Bro, I'm gonna say this and then you guys are watching this 4 years later or something like that. I just said 6, 7, bro. If you don't know what it is, right? Maybe you're let me see. If you're 18, you're gonna be 14. No, if you're 14, you have TikTok. Say you're a younger person, 9, you don't have TikTok, you don't know what 6, 7 is. It's just a meme right now. It's really dumb, and people okay, I'm gonna stop talking about that. I should talk about coding. But what you can do is multiple assignment, and basically it assigns each variable to the corresponding number in order. So the order matters here. Num1 is equal to 5, num2 is equal to 6, and num3 is equal to 7. So so the order in which you write down all these numbers matter. All these signs matter. So if we print out everything, let's copy and paste this actually. If we print out everything, if we print out all the variables, we're going to get 5, 6, 7. Right? If we change the order here, num1 is going to be stored as 6 now, num2 is going to be stored as 5, and num3 is going to be stored as 7. Now, this feature isn't really going to be as useful because you can just write these down all in different lines, right? You can write down num1 is equal to 6, num2 is equal to 5, num3 is equal to 7. Okay, you could have just done this, honestly. You can write down different lines. It could be less cluttery if you want to, but I know some uses for this. This one is pretty, it could be pretty helpful in some cases, but you're just not going to really use that as often. Now, hopefully you guys were coding along the way, because maybe I should have said that at the beginning. Okay, that would have been helpful. I'll say it in the next video. But hopefully you guys have been coding along the way, really getting these things, writing these things down are a lot better than just trying to remember it and never use it, right? You're not going to learn by watching a video how to swim. You're going to learn by swimming after watching a video how to swim, right? So hopefully this video helped. Try to cover as many features as I could. But as always, if you have any questions, put it down in the comment section. And if you found this video helpful, consider subscribing and liking the video. Thank you for watching.